I want to start today with a number that it genuinely made my jaw drop. I had to go back and double check it because it sounded like a typo. 12,000.
That is a very specific, very large number. But without context, it could be anything. Calories in a cheat meal. The price of Bitcoin in, what, 2013?
In the United Kingdom, that is the approximate number of people arrested in a single year for posts they made on social media.
12,000 people.
12,000. So that breaks down to an average of over 30 people every single day. And just to be clear, we're not talking about people plotting bank heists or coordinating cyber terrorism. We're talking about things people typed into a phone.
Often as a joke, I imagine.
Exactly. A joke, an insult, just a spicy opinion.
That's staggering. It completely reframes how you usually think about the Western world. I mean, we tend to assume our neighbors across the pond operate under the same basic rules of engagement that we do in the U.S., but, well, that statistic suggests the game has fundamentally changed.
And that is exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We're unpacking a massive, really sprawling conversation between the comedian and author Andrew Doyle and Joe Rogan. And honestly, this isn't just about free speech.
No, it's bigger than that.
It's about how the legal landscape is shifting under our feet, how satire is basically dying because reality has gotten too weird, and this concept Doyle calls the pendulum of culture.
It's a heavy stack of topics today. We're going to look at the legal trap UK citizens are walking into, the definition of woke, which Doyle argues is often misused, and a really trippy section on how we even know what's true anymore in the age of AI.
So let's dive right into what Doyle calls the speech trap, because as an American, looking at the UK legal system right now feels like looking into a funhouse mirror. It looks like us, but everything's distorted and slightly terrifying.
So what's actually happening legally to allow 12,000 arrests?
Well, that's the question.
It comes down to the legal threshold. In the U.S., the First Amendment is this incredibly strong shield. In the UK, that shield, well, it simply doesn't exist in the same way.
Right.
They rely on statutes like the Communications Act of 2003. And the language in there, that is the real trap. It criminalizes speech that is deemed grossly offensive.
Or what was the other one?
Speech that causes needless anxiety.
Needless anxiety. I mean, let's be real. My student loan balance causes me needless anxiety. A traffic jam causes me anxiety. How can you possibly base a criminal justice system on something that subjective?
That is precisely the point Doyle is making. Grossly offensive is entirely in the eye of the beholder. If the listener is offended, the speaker has potentially committed a crime. And he brought receipts on this. He didn't just talk in hypotheticals.
He had specific cases.
Specific cases. The one that really stood out was the Robin Hood airport case.
Oh, this one is a classic. It sounds like a sketch comedy bit, but it's real life. So break that one down.
Okay, so a man named Paul Chambers is supposed to fly out of Robin Hood Airport. It's closed or delayed because of snow. He's frustrated, obviously. So he hops on Twitter, this is a few years ago, and he tweets a joke to his friends.
A joke.
A joke, saying, effectively, you've got a week to get this sorted, or I'm blowing the airport sky high.
Okay. I mean, obviously a joke. It's a frustration tweet. Nobody actually warns an airport of a bombing plot via a public tweet to their buddies. It's just hyperbole.
Right. It's clearly venting. But the authorities didn't see the humor. He wasn't just, told to delete it or banned from Twitter. He was arrested. His DNA was taken. He went through a full criminal trial.
And he was convicted, right, at first.
He was convicted, lost his job, and it took 2 appeals to finally get that overturned.
All for a joke that nobody realistically thought was a threat. So that's the grossly offensive standard at work.
Exactly. But Doyle points out that since then, the bar has arguably gotten even lower. He mentioned a more recent and maybe more ideological case involving an Army veteran named Darren Brady.
This one is wild. Brady retweeted a meme. He didn't even make it himself.
Right.
It arranged the chevrons of the Progress Pride flag to look like a swastika. Now, obviously, that's a heavy-handed visual pun. It's political speech saying, I think this movement is authoritarian.
You would think that falls under political commentary. But the police showed up at his house, and there's video of this encounter. He's being handcuffed.
And when he asks why,
the officer explicitly tells him that he had caused someone anxiety.
That is the moment where the funhouse mirror just cracks. You caused anxiety. Put your hands behind your back. It feels like we've shifted from policing crime to policing feelings.
Doyle argues that is exactly what has happened. The police are interpreting anxiety as a criminal injury. And to show this isn't just targeting one side, Doyle brought up the case of Lucy Connolly during the recent UK riots.
Right.
She tweeted something truly horrific, suggesting people should burn down hotels housing asylum seekers.
Which is a violent, nasty thing to say. No defending the content of that tweet.
Absolutely not. And she deleted it a few hours later, went to walk her dog, realized it was awful. But she was sentenced to 31 months in prison.
Wait, 31 months? That's over 2.5 years in prison for a tweet she deleted. Now, I know listeners are thinking, well, she called for arson, that's dangerous. But in the U.S., would that land you in prison?
And that is the crucial point of contrast. In the United States, even that tweet, as vile as it was, likely would not have led to a prison sentence. And this is where we need to get technical for a second, because the difference is something called the Brandenburg test.
The Brandenburg test. It sounds like a physics exam, but I know it's one of the most important concepts in American law.
It really is. It comes from a 1969 Supreme Court case involving the KKK, of all things. And it established a very, very high bar for restricting speech. In the U.S., the government can only punish inflammatory speech if it meets two specific criteria.
Okay, what are they?
It must be directed to inciting imminent lawless action, and it must be likely to incite such action.
The key word there is imminent, right?
Correct. If I stand in front of a mob with a torch, point at a building, and scream, "Burn that down right now," that is not protected. That is imminent.
Sure.
But shouting, "Burn it down," into the void of the internet with no specific target present immediately in front of you, well, that usually fails the Brandenburg test.
Because there's time for cooler heads to prevail. But the UK doesn't have a Brandenburg test. They have, what did Doyle call them? Non-crime hate incidents.
Yes, this is maybe the most Orwellian part of the whole discussion. A non-crime hate incident is exactly what it sounds like. The police record acts or speech that are admittedly not criminal, but are perceived by the victim as being motivated by hostility.
So it's not a crime, you can't be charged, but you're on a list.
Precisely. It creates a police record. Doyle mentioned that the Scottish police even maintain a database of problematic jokes.
A government database of bad jokes. I feel like some of my opening monologues might be on there. It sounds funny, but the chilling effect is real.
It gets even more intrusive. Doyle talked about a proposed banter ban. This was a legislative proposal where employers could be held liable if an employee overhears a conversation, say, two customers, in a pub that the employee finds offensive.
Hold on. Let's play that out. If I'm a bartender and I overhear two guys at table 4 complaining about immigration or gender politics, and I get offended, my boss gets sued.
That is the implication. It forces the pub owner to essentially police the private conversations of their patrons to avoid liability. It deputizes the bartender as a censor.
It kills pub talk. It suffocates the idea of a public square. But Doyle argues this isn't just about laws appearing out of thin air. He says this legal framework is the downstream effect of a cultural movement. He uses the word woke, but I feel like everyone defines that differently.
They do.
How is Doyle defining it?
He's very specific about this. He doesn't mean being kind or, being aware of injustice. He defines it as authoritarianism in a sheep costume.
That's a vivid image. A wolf in sheep's clothing, but the sheep is strict.
Think of it as a velvet glove, iron fist situation.
Yeah.
Doyle argues that this movement uses the language of kindness, equity, inclusion, safety to enforce strict conformity. Because most people are decent, right?
Right.
If you say, we just want to be inclusive, most people nod along. But then inclusive morphs into, we must exclude anyone who disagrees with our specific worldview.
He says people want to be kind, so they agree to the language. But then they realize that language is being used to build a cage.
And this leads to his central thesis, the pendulum theory.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is the part that I think everyone, regardless of their politics, needs to really hear.
Doyle believes that human beings have an innate authoritarian impulse. It's not unique to the left or the right. Currently, the tools of censorship and control, the debanking, the canceling, the hate speech laws, have been forged by this woke cultural moment.
But the pendulum always swings back. I see where this is going. If you spend 10 years building a machine that can arrest people for tweets and freeze their bank accounts for wrongthink, eventually the people you hate are going to be the ones standing at the control panel.
Exactly. If you erode the principle of free speech to target your enemies today, you leave yourself defenseless when the political winds shift tomorrow. Doyle's fear is that the right is going to pick up those same weapons, those same grossly offensive laws, and use them just as ruthlessly against the left.
It's the classic warning. Don't build a weapon you wouldn't want pointed at yourself. Now, Speaking of shifting winds and blurred lines, we have to talk about Titania McGrath.
Ah, yes.
Because this is where the conversation got really funny, but also kind of sad.
Titania. For those who don't know, Titania McGrath is a character Andrew Doyle created on Twitter years ago. She's a satirical persona, a radical intersectionalist poet who is constantly outraged by everything.
She's the embodiment of that sheep costume authoritarianism. She wants to ban everything in the name of tolerance. But Doyle told Rogan that he's hitting a wall. He said the scariest part of his job is that he can't out-satirize reality anymore.
The gap between satire and genuine news headlines has collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
We call this Poe's Law, the idea that extreme views are now so common you can't distinguish a parody from a real extremist.
Right.
And Doyle mentioned the incident with Ted Cruz.
Oh, right. Titania tweeted something about firing her immigrant housekeeper for voting for Trump because, and I love this logic, there's no place for racism in this house.
It's clearly a joke about the hypocrisy of the character firing an immigrant to prove you aren't racist.
Mm-hmm.
But Ted Cruz, a sitting U.S. senator, retweeted it thinking it was a real example of liberal intolerance.
And when a U.S. senator can't tell the difference between a comedian's joke and a real constituent, we are in trouble. But it's not just Twitter jokes, it's actual court cases. They discussed a case in Australia called Giggle v. Tickle.
You really can't make these names up. If you wrote that in a script, it would be rejected for being too on the nose.
Truly. So break down Giggle v. Tickle for us.
Giggle was an app designed as a female-only space, a digital refuge for women. A biological male, who identifies as a woman, named Roxanne Tickle, sued the app for being excluded.
And won.
And won. The ruling essentially stated that excluding biological males who identify as women from a female-only app was discriminatory. Doyle uses this to show how the law is being rewritten to prioritize gender identity over biological sex.
10 years ago, that lawsuit would have sounded like a Titania McGrath sketch. Today, it's legal precedent.
Exactly.
It really feels like we're rewriting reality in real time, which leads us to the section of their conversation that totally blew my mind. It wasn't about politics. It was about epistemology. How do we know anything is true?
This was fascinating. Doyle brought up this new book that claims Shakespeare was actually a black Jewish woman named Amelia Bassano.
I looked this up. The evidence is, let's be polite and say creative, Doyle said the author claims Shakespeare is an anagram for she-speaker.
Which honestly is fantastic wordplay. But as historical methodology, it falls apart immediately.
And the author even included her own drawings of what this woman looked like as proof. It's funny, but it points to this desire to revise history to fit current identity politics. But, and here's where it gets really meta-ruppa, Rogan and Doyle themselves got caught in this trap during the interview.
Yes, this was a perfect moment of real-time fact-checking. They were discussing a rumor that a black actress had been cast as Helen of Troy in a new movie. They were analyzing it as another example of this historical revisionism.
The face that launched 1,000 ships being race-swapped, they were ready to be outraged.
They were. But then Jamie Rogan's producer looked it up. And it turns out the source of that outrage was basically a random tweet or a headline from a Hungarian conservative outlet. It was mostly just a rumor.
It was a perfect demonstration of the fog of war in the information age. Even two people who are hyper-aware of media manipulation, Rogan and Doyle, almost accepted a narrative because it fit the pattern they were discussing.
It's confirmation bias in action. It reminds me of the elephant skull analogy Doyle used.
This is one of my favorite takeaways from the whole thing.
He talked about the ancient Greek myth of the Cyclops, the one-eyed monster. Why did they believe in that? Well, Greeks likely found elephant skulls.
Right, and if you look at an elephant skull, it doesn't look like an animal we know. It has that massive central hole where the trunk goes.
Exactly. If you've never seen an elephant and you see a giant skull with one big hole in the middle, you don't think trunk, you think giant eye, you think monster.
We fill in the gaps of our knowledge with myths that make sense to us. Ancient Greeks used Cyclops. Today, Doyle argues, people use conspiracy theories, like the idea that the CIA created the 1960s counterculture in Laurel Canyon.
Or the Shakespeare truther movement. Doyle points out that people often prefer a complex, secret reality to a simple one. It's more exciting to believe Shakespeare was a secret aristocrat than to accept he was just a talented middle-class guy from Stratford.
But here is the danger. While we are busy filling in gaps with myths, technology is starting to hide the gaps from us entirely. Doyle talked about his experiment with ChatGPT versus Grok, Elon Musk's AI.
This is significant for the future of information access. Doyle was trying to translate a Latin text by the historian Suetonius. Now, Suetonius wrote about Roman emperors, and let's just say those guys were not known for their modesty. The text was explicit.
And ChatGPT was like, nope, too naughty, can't do it.
It acted like a frantic parent covering a child's eyes. It refused to translate a historical text because it violated safety guidelines.
It feels incredibly paternalistic. You can't handle the history.
Whereas Grok provided the translation immediately. This seems like a small annoyance, but the implications are huge. Doyle also mentioned trying to find an article about a grooming gang case in the UK.
A very sensitive topic.
Very politically charged. ChatGPT would show the article for a split second and then delete it, saying it violated terms of service.
That's terrifying. It's one thing to say, I don't know. It's another for the AI to find the fact, decide it's unsafe for you to see, and then hide it.
It's the digital equivalent of the grossly offensive law we talked about earlier. If the AI is programmed with a specific worldview, a specific definition of safety, it becomes a tool for shaping reality, not just retrieving it. It becomes a gatekeeper.
This connects directly to the final, and honestly the darkest part of their discussion, institutional capture. They brought up Yuri Bezmenov. I feel like his name is popping up everywhere lately.
It is. Bezmenov was a KGB defector in the 1980s. He gave a famous interview where he laid out the Soviet strategy of ideological subversion. He called it demoralization.
And he said it takes about 15 to 20 years, exactly one generation to work.
The theory is that you don't need to fight a hot war to destroy a country. You just indoctrinate a generation of students with a specific ideology. You wait for those students to graduate and ascend to positions of power in government, media, and education.
Doyle and Rogan debated whether this was a coordinated plot or just ideas taking root naturally. But they agreed the result is the same. We have a disconnect between the elites running institutions and the masses.
Doyle points to the term the blob, the permanent civil service and bureaucracy that resists political change regardless of who is elected. It's a form of inertia that protects the established ideology. And the media acts as the mouthpiece for that blob.
They talked about the BBC editing a Trump speech. This was the bloodbath comment that was all over the news.
Right. Trump used the word bloodbath in the context of the auto industry economy, saying it would be a bloodbath for the industry if tariffs weren't enacted. But the BBC edited the clip to make it sound like a literal call to violent insurrection.
It's manipulation, plain and simple. But Doyle points out that the EU is taking it a step further. Have you heard of pre-bunking?
This is a term used by Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the EU Commission. Pre-bunking is the idea of inoculating the public against misinformation before they even see it.
That sounds like Minority Report. We're going to debunk the thing you haven't even read yet.
It frames the public as patients who are prone to a virus and the government as the doctor administering a vaccine against wrongthink. Doyle and Rogan view it as a soft euphemism for censorship. It presumes that the state knows the absolute truth.
And any deviation is a disease.
Right.
So if we zoom out, what is the through line here? We've gone from a guy getting arrested for a joke about an airport to a KGB prediction about the demoralization of the West.
The through line is the centralization of control over information, whether it's the UK police arresting someone for causing anxiety, or ChatGPT refusing to translate Latin, or the EU pre-bunking narratives. The mechanism is the same, protecting people from ideas deemed dangerous.
And the danger, as Doyle points out, isn't necessarily a speech itself, it's the precedent.
Exactly. This matters to everyone listening because these tools, these laws, these AI filters are being built right now. They are being justified by safety, kindness, and inclusion. But once the machinery of censorship is built, it doesn't matter who built it. It matters who is sitting in the driver's seat tomorrow.
That's the pendulum. Today, the tool might be used to stop hate speech. Tomorrow, it could be used to stop dissent.
And if history tells us anything, the definition of those words changes with the political weather.
I want to leave you with a thought from the episode. Doyle mentions that we often fill in the gaps of our knowledge with comfortable myths, like the elephant skull becoming a cyclops. But in an age of AI and curated news, are we even aware there are gaps anymore?
Or is the screen just showing us a perfectly complete, perfectly fabricated picture?
And if that picture is shattered, do we have the critical thinking skills left to handle the pieces? Something to think about next time you see a content warning on a post. Thanks for diving in with us.
Stay curious.
See you next time.